everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome to my channel. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Thursday. Can you believe it's already Thursday afternoon? Okay, so around 3 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to chat with Derick Dillard via DMs on Twitter and through email. He and I exchanged a number of messages, and he talked with me about he and Jill leaving the series Counting On, which airs on TLC and features his wife, Jill Dillard's family, the Duggars. The Duggars have been on TLC for, more than a decade. Their show was once 19 Kids and Counting and is now called Counting On. And he and Jill had been a part of the show. And in fact, when the show launched in 2015, following what happened with Josh Duggar, the show was supposed to be all about Jill and Jessa. It was Jill and Jessa counting on, detailing their marriages, their engagements, their marriages, their babies, so much, right? And we would have thought that because they headlined the show that they would have been paid, but Derick says that's simply not true. He also outlined one of the reasons why they left had to do with the fact that his father-in-law, Jim Bob Duggar, seemed to have a interest in the family business more so than the hopes and dreams of what Jill and Derick wanted. For instance, he said that they wanted to take a job and he had planned to go on an interview and purchase plane tickets for it. And he found out only after the fact that he was unable to take the job due to a contract that his father-in-law, Jim Bob Duggar, claimed that he had. He also said that after that happened, it was clear to him and his wife that the hopes and dreams and what they wanted for their future was not compatible with what Jim Bob Duggar wanted. As a result, he claims that Jill and him have been cutting out toxic relationships from their lives. He also said that Jill is in therapy along with working on her establishing boundaries. So it's interesting because the same time that I interviewed him, he appeared on a podcast called First Class Fatherhood. Now, you might remember this podcast because this podcast also interviewed John Goslin. Now, here's the thing. Derick's interview isn't really about counting on. It's not really about anything, but it is about fatherhood. And in part of this interview, he's asked about how he met Jill. And it's fascinating because he details the story, and I'll show you in a second, of how he first became friends with Jim Bob Duggar, who had asked him for details about what's going on sort of in the missionary world, because at the time Derick had been in college and he had gotten involved in missionary work as a result of that, of being a Christian and joining this church where missionary work was very important. He became acquainted with Jim Bob Duggar, and he said over the course of several months and years, he and Jim established a friendship, and it was over time that Jim Bob actually introduced the two of them. Think about this. Now, we knew this from the show, but hearing this story in his own words, it's pretty telling. And I was like, I wonder how Jim Bob feels about this now. So let's take a listen.
So were you aware then, before you met your wife, were you aware of the Duggars, the 19 and counting? Were you aware of that show? Had you seen it before you ever met your wife, or did you know all about that before you get in? And what was it like for you to marry into the family?
So Jill and I actually grew up in the same area, and I was aware of her family, but then didn't get to know her until actually I was in Nepal and had just had a relationship with her dad shortly before going to Nepal. Meeting him once before that and corresponding with him, and then our relationship kind of grew because her dad would call and try and get or ask me to share with him some updates from the mission field, and so our relationship grew over a couple of years and about a year and a half, and really started to see a lot of the commonalities between Jill and I. And her focus was to be she was studying midwifery at the time, the practice of being a midwife, helping women deliver babies, and she wanted to use that on the mission field. So we had a lot of common interest in that way. And so he actually gave me her number and said, "Hey, why don't you give her a call and tell her it's okay. I gave you her number." And so I didn't really know where that would lead exactly, but I texted her. I was on vacation at the time with a buddy of mine in Tokyo, climbing Mount Fuji, and had some downtime. So we actually talked a couple of times on YouTube, and I think 11 hours combined between the first two Skype calls that we had together, and really hit it off and had a lot in common. My family and her family were like very politically involved in our area in Arkansas. So as a kid, I knew of her dad as a state representative, and more just from a distance, and then really got to know her as a person, and really just respected where she's coming from and how genuine she was and her love for people. So we really hit it off, and had the desire to work on the mission field together and to raise our family on the mission field is what we're moving toward.
Think about this. He meets Jim like one time before he's in Nepal to go on this missionary trip, and then he ends up meeting Jim while he's in Nepal, and then after Jim comes back to the United States, Jim checks in with him to find out about how everything is going in that world, and then over the course of a couple of years they develop this friendship, and then he's just like, hey, you should talk to my daughter, and he literally gives Derick Jill's phone number. Think about that. Think about that. That's so wild to me. Like, Jim was so at one point enamored with Derick and thought Derick was the bee's knees, that he would be the perfect suitor for his daughter. Jim basically arranged this marriage in a way, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't make the relationship happen, but he definitely was like, you should meet my daughter, and then they meet and they have a lot in common. And hey, there's no doubt that the two of these, that Jill and Derick seem to have a very loving marriage, and that they really enjoy each other, and that they do have things in common. And it sounds like they both had the same interests in serving God and doing mission work. Now, we know the mission work ended up not working out. Earlier in this interview, he actually talked about how they were in Central America, and at the time they left, it was getting too dangerous for them to be. So they decided to come back right before she gave birth to their second son, Samuel. But it's interesting because after that happened, he said that when they returned, circumstances in their personal life ended up with him choosing to go into law school. Now, he didn't expand upon why he decided to go into law school, but when he talked to me, he did talk about his child advocacy and how TLC doesn't look or take care of children, and how children on that network are exploited for profit and for views. And then around the same time all this is going on, Jill gets involved in a lawsuit where Jim Bob decides on the behalf of his girls that they are going to sue the city of Springdale for releasing information to In Touch Weekly related to the investigation into Josh and what happened with them. And it makes me wonder, when he says that he picked law school, was it because of the way that, did he not know about what happened with Jill and he learned about it after the fact? And then when he realized what happened after the fact, was this about like parents protecting them? And there's this other aspect of this interview where he actually talks about how his goal is to either work as a public defender or as a prosecutor. And he recently interned with the Attorney General in Arkansas. So if he works as a prosecutor, he would theoretically be helping people he would work for the state, and he would be prosecuting individuals that commit crimes. As a public defender, he would be defending those people. But I just wonder what those personal circumstances are. And I also wonder, like, what do you think Jim Bob actually thinks? Do you think that when he looks back at this now and he's just like, oh, I met this guy and he was just really great and he wanted to serve the Lord and he was doing this amazing missionary work, I really thought that this was going to be the perfect fit for Jill, and then Jill ends up meeting him. I mean, he must have known that Derick grew up in the secular world, that he attended a public school, that he attended a public college, which also made me wonder, like, with Jill having been so protected, you know what I mean? Like, she was protected by her parents. She was sheltered. She was homeschooled. She didn't hang out with a lot of people. She didn't have a lot of real life experience by the time she actually met him. And I wonder what it was they actually had in common. Was it like their service to the Lord, wanting to do missionary work? Was it that? Was it that specific thing? Or did they just have the shared common interests? Derick's a pretty active person. I don't know if Jill is really into activity. I don't really know. It's hard to know what Jill's into. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like still, as she's approaching her late 20s, I don't really know fully what Jill's identity is. And I don't know that she knows what her identity is. And I don't know what she's actually interested in or what she cares about. And I hope that this relationship with Derick has allowed her to grow. But I think it's kind of ironic that it was Jim Bob that ultimately introduces his daughter to the man that ultimately causes Jill to open up and see the world in a completely different way. And it was Derick and his secular world of public school and public service and, you know, really being involved in the real world that probably woke Jill up and to realize, like, hey, this life isn't what you think it is. Like, you have a voice, you have a choice. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to, you know, bend to my every need. You don't have to just stay inside of your kitchen and take care of the boys. I mean, he has said no matter what, she can work. His mom worked. His mom wore business suits. His mom wore pants. So I just wonder sometimes, like, was Jim Bob just like desperate? Did he really like Derick? And I wonder what Jim Bob thinks about that now, knowing that it was Derick, the person that he actually picked for Jill, that ultimately led to the estrangement. And I don't blame Derick. In fact, I would say Derick has been more instrumental in probably helping Jill see that she didn't have to live that way. But it's Jim Bob that led his daughter there. It's almost kind of funny in a way. So if you want to check out the full podcast, they talk about a whole lot of stuff. They talk about discipline. They talk about his dad passing away. They talk about what he and his Jill have been doing during quarantine. There's a ton in this interview, and there's aspects of this guy where when he interviews people where I feel like he could dig a lot deeper, but he just doesn't. And so in this case, I really wish he would have expanded on some of the stuff related to Jill and his marriage, but it's about fatherhood, not about his marriage. So tell me what your thoughts are. Are you surprised to hear how they met? And if you want to see the full video on the first class fatherhood, check out the description below and click the link. All right, you guys, I will be back later with more. Bye.